Well, hello, welcome to INXS Access All Areas, episode 197 of the podcast that aims to dive deep into all things great about this fantastic rock band, doing it with listeners around the world, patrons, loyal fans, and most importantly, my compadre B. Hello, B, how are you? We've got an album review day today, so pretty excited, huh?
Loving it. I can't wait. I've got all my INXS CDs out. I've immersed myself, so I can't wait to get on with listening to this. Well, we've got a new team member. We've now got Andrew Lambie on board.
I saw him corresponding accordingly. He's a great contributor to our motivation to keep this podcast going because of his fandom. But tell us a bit about Andrew, what he's going to be contributing.
He's going to be helping with a lot more of our research, especially for the newsletter. And he's just very excited to be there. So it's coming out of season for his bed and breakfast on the Isle of Mull. So he's got a little bit more time for us. So thank you, Andrew. And it was lovely speaking to you and Danielle this morning. I've been speaking to another guy today via listening to our music that we're going to be playing today. I noticed that it was recorded at a place called Electric Studios. So I thought I'd ring the Electric Studios and thought that could be part of our bus tour, couldn't it? Eh? Unfortunately, in 2011, it got knocked down and made into flats.
Oh, okay.
So it won't be on the itinerary. But anyway, I'll tell you more about Phil later on in the podcast.
So it's probably more like gas studios now, people's home gas and things.
Not electric.
That's right. Okay. Well, I guess we came off an episode last week where we did a bit of a deep dive into a song called The Stairs, and hopefully people enjoyed that and connected accordingly. There is a little bit of a spin-off because we'll be talking about that song today in a further sort of deep dive, the album that we're going to be discussing. One of the interesting things last week, I saw just on our emails, the gentleman that we went out with last week, Victor Hugo, did he reach out to us during the week?
He did, because I messaged him on his actual YouTube thing that he did, and he says thank you very, very much. He was very honoured, and so that was nice. And hello, Hugo, if you're listening.
Victor,
is it Victor Hugo?
I think it is. But, look, hopefully you enjoyed that version. It was a more sedate sort of version of The Stairs that we went out with last week, and and look, it was a fun episode to do, and hopefully listeners enjoyed it and allowed us to indulge a little bit in what was sort of more of a deeper cut retrospective. But we will talk more about that song within this album today. But what else has come across your desk, B, in your INXS world?
Oh, well, I talked then about the bus tour that is coming together, everybody. So we'll be able to announce that in a couple of weeks' time. If you're interested, get your emails to us and we can get you down on the list for that. And that's something to celebrate our 5th anniversary in May next year.
Wow, 5 years. There you go. It is quite funny, but you must go through this social a little bit and allow us to navel gaze for a moment, listeners. But when people sort of, you might say, you run a podcast, etc., and then they say, oh, right, and what's your topic? I talk about INXS and how many episodes you've done. And now we're hitting close to 200. They're like, there's a certain sort of look in their eyes where they go, what on earth could you say that you couldn't say in 10 episodes that it took you 200 to say? And I just go, I don't fucking care. Love the band, and we're diving deep anyway, so fuck yeah.
We love it. I know it's when I speak to people about it and they say, what you work at OPS and you actually do this for INXS as well, and it's global. Like, pretty global. Look, I often say, listen, you'd be surprised how much you can deep dive within a particular song, album, track, let alone career. So, watch to the floor.
Correct. We are striving forward, etc., with more material and things along the way. I do know people like Andrew and other people come up with some interesting topics, and there are a few suggestions of things we can talk furtherly about. So we will look forward to maybe doing that with your topic suggestions. Anything else, B, in your INXS world?
No.
Okay. Topic in today. We alluded to it maybe last week. We're going to be discussing the Original Sin tribute album done by the band themselves with friends tributing themselves within themselves. Look, it was a very interesting endeavour. I don't think I've ever really seen a band go about sort of almost covering their own songs. Having said that, a famous contemporary of theirs only did this about 18 months ago, which was U2, who went back and actually redid, I think, 40 songs of their own sort of material in the past and sort of re-recorded. And typical U2, following INXS in terms of ideas.
So many years later.
But look, I guess we're going to sort of dive deep a bit on what was called Original Sin, the album, INXS going back and basically deconstructing the songs from their career with guest singers and vocalists and DJs, etc. there. So looking forward to going through that with you in a moment, B. I normally sort of say, what's it time for, B? And you say News of the Week, or I say News of the Week, and then we now go into News of the Week. But we're going to bypass that today because we've got so much to unpack as we're about to go into our feature album review. A fangirl favourite of yours. Before we unpack this album, I thought we would bring listeners up to speed about the sort of era and the timeframes that this album sort of came about. It was only about a month or two ago. We did a Switch album deep dive. We talked a little bit about the recording of that and Rockstar INXS and then the tour with JD and things. And it was just interesting going back. I happened to be looking through a fantastic interview that I mentioned about a year ago that JD did with Rolling Stone. If JD doesn't answer our messages and come on, this might be I had this idea that I might actually have to play JD and you interview me and I can play JD and I'm answering the Rolling Stone questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
I would rather JD be there to answer it.
Yeah.
But,
well, you were born on the same day, so it's the same thing anyway.
There we go. But I don't smoke. So anyway. Look,
you see smoking.
Well, thank you. The key thing that just when I was reading that article the other day, INXS, when they did come back and release Switch and then in 2006 went on tour, they played 142 shows in 2006 alone. They played about another 50-something like that in 2007. So JD was talking a little bit about doing 3 concerts a day or two off, 3 concerts a day or two off, and just trying to preserve the vocal cords and things. But what it means overall, once 2007 sort of came and went and hit early 2008, that had a pretty full-on 3 years. So 2005 was, the Rockstar INXS auditions. It was recording, it was actually doing the show itself in 2005. It was then sort of having the final announcement who was going to sing. It was then going to the studio doing the album. It was then in 2006 going on a tour and rotating songs and getting them ready for live and then going out and then touring them, which, as we said, was 142 gigs. Having some gaps, after the tour. And I know they toured Australia back and forth a couple of times, along with Europe and America. But doing 2007, by the time 2008 came around, they were probably sort of after a little bit of a rest and things. And this particular album sort of came out in October 2010. But just going back, doing a bit of research on it seemed like the band did get together around 2009 and were just looking at what to do next. And they were bantering around with a few ideas and things. And one of the inspirations behind sort of coming up with this as an idea, I think that they were sort of playing some of the old songs and just road testing some of them and playing different arrangements. And Kirk said, well, maybe we should, maybe take this idea a bit further and maybe get some, some guest singers in and we could maybe make something of it. And John obviously took it, a lead on it and it went from there. So, B, what's your sort of research or digging deep into this era or your sort of knowledge about this album in your mind? Because I reckon, you were probably getting back into your fandom by this stage and really starting to reconnect a bit with the band.
Well, 2010, I had a serious back operation.
Okay.
Very, very serious one. And so I was off, lying down, and this album came out. So that's why I love it so much, because it really helped me get through, because it's such some beautiful songs. So I was very aware of this album when it came out. So, this was my happy place at the time.
Yeah. And look, often when we go through this album, we're going to sort of dive deep into the tracks, have a little bit of discussion and things like that. But let's just start off a little bit with the album cover, B. It's quite a colourful, pretty cover, isn't it? Tell us what your thoughts are when you look at the cover. What sort of comes to your mind?
Well, it's a tiger. Yep. It's split into 2. It's like a stamp, isn't it? Yep. And then, it's like rainbow colours with the pinks and the blues and the oranges. Yeah. Wonder why they chose that. But it actually echoes on the back with the portraits of all the singers in those different colours as well. Yeah.
Now, let's start with the song, the album title, Original Sin. Okay. Do you give that a tick as a name or do you give it a cross?
I think it's a confusion for a lot of people. And when I say, have you heard that album? They go, the song. No, the album. So for me, I think it wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
Is it a sin to change your music around when it's already been so good? Maybe it's something to do with that. I don't know.
Yeah. So I agree with you in the sense that it can be confusing. You're taking an old song, putting on a new twist on things. The word original, though, does actually sort of hark back to going back to original songs. So maybe some thought it was sinful to play around with them in this particular fashion.
Maybe.
But probably the name didn't lend itself to an identity, and maybe that, again, affected the marketing at the time. This is sort of an album that probably John took the lead on, and I could sort of understand why a little bit, because if you're Andrew Farris particularly, and with Michael having passed, you've got these numerous babies, which are songs that you've written. It would be very difficult as the author of those songs to go back yourself and dissemble them and pull them apart, either unemotionally or emotionally in some way. So I can sort of understand in one respect why Andrew was less hands-on with maybe, as I said, the deconstruction process of this, because you build a nice house, the last thing you want to do is to go back to it and dissemble it and rebuild it again, because you're probably very proud of how the house looks. That aside, I think John was the perfect guy in the band to be able to do this, given, what Mark Opitz has said quite loudly about, John's really genius with music and songs and technology and guitars and drums and just being such a musical guy. It was probably a kid in a candy store for him, particularly on the tracks. Most of these tracks here, John-written songs, drum opera aside. So he probably could go into them and dissemble them a little bit more unapologetically than probably Andrew could have. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I was telling you earlier that I spoke to the guy who owned Electric Studios, which was the one in Australia that they used. Yeah. And he says he was very aware of Andrew in the studio and what a complete genius of how he was arranging things. So Andrew was actually there, hands-on, but John was probably more on the production side of it.
I know John particularly wanted to play on a lot of the sounds, and I think the initiative of this album was if you don't change the songs dramatically, why do it? And I think when we actually look at this as an album, we'll break down the tracks a little bit later, but when you actually look at each of the particular songs, they are quite starkly different to the original format. Some completely different. Some almost feel like it's a brand new song just with the same lyrics, which is probably the goal and the mission they set out to do. When this album was sort of developing its life behind things, there was a bit of secrecy about it. We got snippets of rumours that this person could be appearing guest vocaling on something. I know it was like nearly any sort of famous person touring Australia. INXS were able to get into the studio and record things, and not all the singers ended up on this album. Like Brandon Flowers apparently, covered one of the songs. I think his management thwarted that song being put on the album because he had a solo album coming out at that same time.
Yeah.
So sometimes...
Funny you mentioned him because the guy that I was just telling you about, he also was in this recording studio and he says that was a fantastic song. So we missed out on that one.
Yeah. I think, the band had wish lists of people they could get to sing on some of the tracks. It probably took 18 months, 2 years for all of it to come together upon sort of, writing and, I guess reproducing the tracks, getting artists in and things. What was interesting is some of these artists that they thought could sing certain songs, some of those artists came in and said, yeah, that'd be great, but could I try this particular song instead? And Rob Thomas was an example of that for Original Sin. I think they'd had some experience with Rob singing Never Tear Us Apart live before with them. Thought that would be a great way to go. But suddenly, Rob was like, I'd love to do Original Sin, And I think from that point of view, interesting where just the artists themselves who were coming in had their own sort of ideas of what they wanted to do as well, and the band were open to listening to that. In terms of the album duration, the album goes for, I think, all up in its track listing. Where are we down here? 49 minutes and 37 seconds. It's definitely sort of a solid, setup where the main album that came out, there were 12 tracks on it. There are some bonus editions we'll talk a little bit about. The song selections were quite interesting, B. They weren't all cookie cutter, greatest hits type songs. They've taken some deep cut songs, which we'll go through in a moment, and played around with those. You would think, songs like Need You Tonight may have appeared on there. Yeah, they didn't put it on there. So they were quite brave in some of the song selections and some of the choices they made and some of the tracks they omitted putting on. So we'll break that down in a little bit more detail. In terms of co-productions, there's a gentleman called James Ash who was a co-producer on this. Now, those who might not know James actually is an English-born Aussie producer, band member of a band called Rogue Traders. Some of you might know Rogue Traders from the fact they did a INXS sample interpolation called One of My Kind, which was around 2003, 2004. And maybe, again, John heard that and thought, this guy, knows how to take, INXS tracks and mix them accordingly. I'm going to reach out to James and see if he'll come on and potentially give some feedback on this album, B.
Yeah, that would be great.
In terms of the label, I guess this was around about the time that Chris Murphy had just got re-involved with the band again. So we think about this particular era. We had, the Switch album, we had other management involved, we had BMG or Sony BMG. We had probably the band, JD, suddenly, separate and have a little bit of a falling out at that particular point. I know Chris Murphy got re-involved with the band, got a lot of their masters back and was looking to turn band, into a brand and reignite just the catalogue and things. He was very optimistic, and I know as a mouthpiece for the band at the time, he said, I haven't seen the band this motivated and creative since the Kick album. Was that spin or was it actually legit? As I said, Chris, was the salesman for the band. His stewardship in these early days, pretty important. Our listeners would know that there was a sort of a greatest hits album out early in the year called Platinum. It was sort of an online sort of sale, and I think it went to like number one in Europe in some countries and things, and we'll talk more about that on our compilations, part 3, album sort of compilations that will be in a few weeks' time. Chris was very much honing the band towards some sort of focal point of what they were going to do next. And this was, in some respects, quite an innovative idea. In some respects, probably confusing to some. When, the media, did anything to do with INXS, they, whether it was Switch or whether it was, work with Tim Rice or whatever, they constantly, were dogged by Michael and the ghosts of Michael and what would the band do. And a lot of the rhetoric about anything was always caught up in Michael. There's some really interesting footage, and I think, B, you've probably seen this on YouTube, and around about the time where the band are in the studio and Tim's talking about, you don't cease to be a family, even though, you've lost one of your brothers and things. And there's some great footage in the studio of them with Rob Thomas and with Ben Harper and some of the different guests, which are very available for you, for our listeners to go check out. The good thing about some of those interviews in the studio, explaining things, was that they gave reasons why they wanted to do this, and they were able to articulate it and said, look, a lot of our listeners have grown with us. We'll take this album and probably, go, oh my God, it's not like the originals. Well, no, it's not. And they're 30 years into their career at this stage, and, they don't have that singer that they probably wanted, and JD had probably fallen by the wayside previously. Chris Murphy was quite staunch about, JD not being in the band again, and that obviously did happen because JD does appear on this album, on a couple of tracks. He did tour Australia with this particular album in 2011. But do you remember around this time when the band were on some of the award shows and on some of the media stuff, what they were wearing? Because I know that's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, they were on the Arias, weren't they?
They were,
That's one of my
correct.
favourites, but we'll talk about that when we talk about that song.
Sure.
Yeah. But what were they wearing? They were wearing the suits. They looked so really hot. They looked so good. And they'd all got really neat shaved hair and they looked beautiful, all of
Well, I
them.
think they constructed a sort of style for it. They go, okay, we're sort of going back. We're doing some very sort of sophisticated deep dive into our catalogue. I don't say maturing it up, so to speak, but had a very lean, professional-looking stage-crafted presence when they were sort of touring and promoting this particular album when it came out. They did go and appear on shows around the world, like Jay Leno. I remember on that with Pat Monahan singing Beautiful Girl. That's available on YouTube. They were definitely promoting around the world on various TV shows and tours and things like that. As a sort of a release and as a sort of a chart-dominating thing, it didn't sort of hit the zeitgeist, unfortunately, and probably, as I said at the outset, may have confused some people, may have been something where you're taking something which is people's favourites and you're playing around with their heads a little bit. You wouldn't call it a commercially driven enterprise. You'd probably call it more of an artistic expression and a documentation of their career and enjoying and going back to celebrate the career with friends and those inspired by the band, many which appear on the album. Song number 1, which is Drum Opera. We will play a little interlude of that now and then come back and chat about it. All right, B, you got the new ball on this one. This is a little bit of a favour of yours, I sense, from our history together.
Oh, it's a big favourite. Sis, compared to the Stairs opening, intro, is perfect. It's absolutely a number 10 for me. It's perfect drum solo. But I've got a little thing here from John. My wife Kerry and I were hosting a dinner party one night. This is when Drum Opera came to me. The track was initially conceived to be an opener for the INXS tour concert because Murphy had suggested I come up with a drum moment to build up the suspense at the start of the show. Something big and theatrical. So here we are on this night at the dinner table. I'm sitting there and it just started playing in my head. You can imagine him, can't you, at a dinner party? All of a sudden he's like,
Yeah.
He says that Kerry nudged him to come back, but he's like, no, sorry, I've got to go. And he went off to record it. Yeah. And he recorded it there and then, and he wrote it all out, played all the parts, layered it, overdubbed it with the intention that the band would play it in their retrospect parts live.
Yeah. That's right. I think he wrote parts with Tim and Andrew in it, and then, suddenly, I think it got out to about 5 or 6 minutes, and he laughed a bit and said it was probably wise to trim it down a little bit. And this is an important thing. It's sort of sometimes in excess, is that they weren't big into self-aggrandization in big guitar solos or big drum solos and things like that. So this is a little bit of a departure. A lot of the bands in the 70s had this thing called prog rock, bands like Pink Floyd and Genesis and things, and Yes, and they'd have these 7, 8 minute, 10-minute solos within 18-minute songs, and it was such a self-indulgence sometimes, But I think John got this down to 2 minutes 56, and there's a little bit of a setup to the album. It's the only original sort of track on the album, but it's very percussive. It's not a melody so much; it's a percussive sort of track, but it does bring people into the album, and it sort of sets up the next song particularly well. I guess when they were touring and playing, this was sort of quite a centerpiece of the start of the show and part of the show.
Yeah, so you would have seen this played live.
I did, yeah. It's Day on the Green, they did, etc. there.
And I've seen footage, but would they have still done this? So they were in their suits.
Yep.
And then you'd have Andrew on one side, Tim on the other, and they would start the drum each. Is that right? Bit of percussion, and then John would come in.
You know what? I don't remember.
Okay, I'm telling you, that's what you got to remember.
It was called Day on the Green. It was at a winery, and they were the last band of the day, and I had a bit of wine. I remember the vibe and the experience, but I don't remember the
I know you like the feeling of wine, don't you?
There you go. Yeah, that's right. Do I love it as much as you? No, I don't. No, but I think as a linchpin sort of set up as an intro to what is to become thereafter, I think it sets it up quite nicely.
And don't forget, they played it recently in that new one that they did. It wasn't then.
The original 7 original sins.
That was the beginning. It was like a little movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
It played out well, didn't it, to come in at the beginning with all the atmosphere.
It's very literally named to Drum Opera.
That's it.
Like the name. Yeah.
You ain't going to forget that one.
All right, song number 2B. We got Mediate here with vocals guesting from Tricky. Take it away for a little sampler. All right, coming back here. I absolutely love this song. I think this is the classic reason why you would do an album like this, where you take a song like Mediate, which on the INXS kick version, you would say, relatively speaking, and in comparison to this version, the original is quite slight. It's more downbeat. It's more meditative. It's Michael. It's sort of very sort of singular in the sonics and things. In this particular version, they absolutely deconstruct it, rock and roll it up, DJ it up, and then come in with some real thunderous vocals and production sounds, particularly that the ending of the song with the big guitar outro. I think, as the band said at the time, Michael would have loved the fact that Tricky chose to be on this.
Yeah.
And there are some footage on YouTube of him talking about being on and being really privileged to be invited on.
Yeah.
And I just think this is one of the album's rips, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And they said right from the start, Tricky really nailed the vocals on this. Absolutely love it, Andrew Farriss. You can imagine people jogging along to this one. It's just empowering as well, isn't it? The actual beat to it.
Now, this one actually, a couple of things. I think from memory, and look, my brain's a bit fuzzy, does he change a few lyrics on this a little bit compared to the original one? That he might play around with a couple of rhymes.
There's a few changes, not a lot.
No, okay. But also, too, this one was released as a single in the US and in the dance charts, it hit number 5. So it did go number 5 of the Billboard charts, which was the second single on top of one we'll mention in a moment. Again, some really good dance credentials to the band again, which was really a lot of their forte from the early days, remixing a lot of their stuff. It's funny, a lot of people, when they read the word mediate, they see it as meditate, which probably they say in the lyric at some point. But mediate is the song, 4 minutes and 8 seconds. A great sort of rollicking version. As I said again, if you're going to do an album of this type, best to completely strip it back and reimagine it, and they've done that really, really well here.
And it mellows in from drum opera quite well, but
it does,
so different, eh?
Yeah. I think the track listing on this is really good. We'll talk about that later. So that's number 2. Originally an Andrew Farriss pen track only. Obviously Tricky coming with the vocals on this particular one. Good start to things so far. All right, we'll go into song 3B, and that is Original Sin, sung in this incarnation with Rob Thomas and DJ Yeladis. I think she's a Cuban sort of DJ. We'll talk a bit about that in a moment, but over to you to give us a little bit of a taste of this one.
I love you, white boy.
All right, B, Original Sin, give us your take on this.
I don't think it's my favourite song, I've got to be honest here, but come midway, when the festival and the carnival happens, I actually really like that part, and I really enjoy his vocals more. But the beginning, I don't really care for it. It's an okay version. I prefer the original version.
Look, on this particular one, this was released as a single in the US, and in the dance charts it went number 1, which probably around 2010.
I can imagine it would.
Yeah, it was a tribute to probably Rob Thomas in that respect, having quite a strong foothold in the charts at that time, so he probably gave release some legs. Equally, Chris Murphy around this particular time had taken on a lot of world music type stuff, and he had links into the US markets and a lot of the charts, and I think he won a Grammy for artwork on some of these compilations he did with world music, and I think he had some doors were opened within this, particularly getting DJ Yeladis in, and that really did help get some marketing and some exposure and distribution in the right places at the time. There's some good footage of Rob Thomas
in the studio.
Yeah. And look, he sort of says, it's not going to be easy for the band going back and trying to do something like this, but he really liked, I think he sort of almost rehearses, Michael, like did you hear of the murder committed? And he wanted to sing with that sense of passion, because it was a sort of a passionate lyric from Michael. I think he sort of does justice on this. I think the dancey sort of stuff does take away that sort of ominous sort of cautionary tale sound. It does lighten it up a little bit. And I know some listeners might find that a little bit hard to deal with, but it's probably that type of thing, Sunday afternoon, a couple of gin and tonics and a little bit of music there and accepting for what it is. But there's enough going on.
It's more poppy than funky.
It is. Yeah. I mean, there's enough going on here that they've changed it around to make it, as I said, a variation on what the original was. Look, it probably helped the album a lot in terms of getting that exposure and release and distribution into different markets with Rob Thomas appearing on it.
I love you, white boy.
All right, song number 4 here, B. We're going into Never Tear Us Apart.
Tear us apart.
All right, interesting version here. There's a couple of things at play here. The release album that went into most of the countries around the world were the Ben Harper and Mylene Farmer version. Now, Mylene Farmer, she was a French singer and lyricist. You did get an international lyric and a sort of change on this. For the US release, they only had the Ben Harper version. Ben had crossed paths with John Farriss, I guess, over the years, and there was such a great quote where Ben Harper says this about Never Tear Us Apart.
The invitation went out to some of our favourite singers. When I met Ben, he actually performed Never Tear Us Apart in Australia.
INXS material specifically, INXS songs, set the table for singers.
Ben is giving it everything he's got and he's putting his stamp on it.
The interpretations of the songs have been really quite diverse. They're brand new songs.
By the time we got to that second verse, every time I had tears in my eyes.
You were there, two worlds colliding, and they could never tear us apart.
Covering Never Tear Us Apart is like covering Dock of the Bay. I'm not here to make grandiose overstatements. It's just a fucking fact. That's one of the greatest soul songs ever written.
So great to have a fan and a contemporary, I guess, of the band, or maybe a few years after the band's peak, in Ben Harper come out and say that. John did appear up at Blues Fest up on the Your neck of the woods is Blues Fest, isn't it? Is that far from?
Yeah, and it's going to be the last one this year.
Okay.
Pulling it after this year. But yes,
Right. John did appear. John did play with Ben Harper there. He might have played Never Tear Us Apart on drums there with him on one of the tours.
Yes.
But look, this is an internationally flavoured version. We got Ben and you've got Mylene Farmer there. Ben's vocal. I mean, Ben's not a great singer, if I can be really honest. Ben's a great lyricist, whatever there. But he's got a more caustic type vocal delivery. He doesn't quite have some of the velvet tones of a Michael. But sometimes when you hear someone else sing a song, you're like, gee, Michael's such a good singer. But he does capture sort of an emotion and a mood with this song. And I think with the French sort of edition there, it does sort of capture that. I could see, though, this song and this version putting people off. It is very different.
I quite like it. It's stunning to hear her voice in it as well. It's another layer having that French flavour. It makes it even more passionate. And there's a little quote here from Andrew. I have always wanted to hear Never Tear Us Apart as a duet. When I heard Ben Harper and Mylene, I had to hear it over and over again. It was just truly amazing. So it blew Andrew away. The song, it's got it's quite a dynamic. It's as if it could be really played at a cinema. You know, it's got like such really big, but then her creamy vocals in the background when he's singing, it really complements each other.
Absolutely. Up front, sort of in the song number 4 on here, again, it's because Never Tear Us Apart is such an iconic song. It really anchors people probably going to take this one, and you've got to almost leave one at the door to accept the other. So it is one that probably does take a few listens to sort of get into it, but I just look at this as an ultimate sort of tribute between two people singing what was one of INXS's great songs. I understand it's going to be hard to divorce the two of them, though, together.
Did you realise that this was written at Jimi Hendrix's house in New Zealand?
What was written?
Never Tear Us Apart.
I do know it was conceived in New Zealand, but you said Jimi Hendrix.
I know. This is what it says in the actual book. It says written.
I don't know. Jimi Hendrix died about 1968.
Well, I think it might be a different Jimi Hendrix.
Right, okay.
But yeah, it says we were doing some dates in New Zealand and they had a day off and everyone was playing tennis except for me and Michael. This is Andrew.
Yeah.
He says we sat down at the piano. I played Michael some chords, blues songs, and then, Michael just delivered. He said, I don't...
Yeah. In the Kick album, when it was being sort of recorded, they had a couple of sort of incarnations. They had recordings. Well, what I shouldn't say is songwriting sort of hiatuses where in Hong Kong, Michael and Andrew got together, and then New Zealand, they got together, and there was little batches and slabs of songs that got written and recorded in New Zealand, some in Hong Kong and some in Australia. So I would definitely remember that they did have a time in New Zealand together for Kick. Yeah, all right. We'll Never Tear Us Apart. There's song number 4. Goes 3 minutes 57. Doesn't outstay its welcome. Again, mixing it up. All right. B, we'll take it to number 5 now. We're going to go with Beautiful Girl. Give the listeners a taste of this one.
Well, it goes straight into guitars. We don't have the little keyboards until the very, very end, which is really cute. And it lingers at the end there. It's a really nice ballad. He's got a lovely, manly, strong voice. I do like it. But at around about 2.8, I do think that he sounds a little like Bono.
Yeah. Well, is that when he sort of takes the chorus and climbs up a little bit?
Yeah. And really accentuates the Stay With Me. And that's beautiful how he delivers that.
Now, we should mention who it is. It's Pat Monahan from Train.
Yeah.
So Pat Monahan from Train had a pretty good career, actually. And again, one of these bands that probably came after INXS that always loved INXS and things. Train had their big breakout hit in 2001 with a song called Drops of Jupiter. So that was a big worldwide hit. And then they had a little bit of a soft patch, but then they came back, Hey Soul Sister, around about the mid-2000s, and that was a big worldwide hit. But he puts an INXS line in that song where he says, "Hey, soul sister, you're one of my kind," and that's a reference. Yeah. That's an INXS reference, and deliberately parlayed in there.
We like him, hey?
Yeah, but Pat Monahan, really, I think on this particular song, this is one of the standouts for me on the album. I think this is this classic case of me where I feel like it's two different songs. There's a song I grew up with, which I loved around 1981, called "Jealous Sky" by Roxy Music. And that was a tribute song to John Lennon, who died 6 months before. So my first 3, 4, 5 years of my sort of musical awareness of that song, I always thought it was a Roxy Music song. But then when I got into John Lennon a little more in my teens and went back and discovered the original version, it's such a different version. You've got the Roxy Music, very lush, orchestral, big saxophones. And then, you've got this sort of more piano acoustic version of John Lennon. So those two songs to me stand on their own. It's like the same song, but two different versions. And I love them both.
Yeah. And this one, the same.
I feel the same about this. I feel like we've got Michael almost in a Lou Reed vocal, kids piano, very low key, subtle. And I feel like this, it's almost like it's a bit like they've never tear us up by having a big soaring vocal and get more guitars in this. And they've made this more of an anthem.
Yeah.
And again, it's an interesting example that, if they were playing this live now, I'm sure they could go back and Michael could sing this type of version of it.
Yeah.
But this is, around the world, wherever you are, it was a more subtle, low-key, lo-fi sort of effort. This version is a bit stadium rock, ramped it up, and he does a brilliant job on it, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know that Michael lost the lyrics to Beautiful Girl, and then Andrew had to come in with his. Right.
Well, I think I remember when we interviewed Andrew, they got together in the Hawkesbury, and Michael had left lyrics somewhere. I lost them.
They've lost them in the back of the cab, hadn't they?
Yes, I think so, yeah. And as a result of that, that's right. They had to sort of, come up with some more variety. Yeah.
And then Andrew says, well, I've written quite a few songs about my little girl, Grace. We'll have to change it to something else. So, But, it was Andrew's lyrics.
Now, in this particular version, as I said, there's a great live example that on the Jay Leno show where the band's singing and Pat comes along, does a soaring vocal during that particular performance. I thought this was an example, B, where if INXS were to have some commercial success, and when I say commercial success, not just dance, top 5 hits, but they were going to have another big hit, like a Pretty Vegas, where they were able to come back and have that hit. They were going to have land another big hit and get into the consciousness. I thought this was this opportunity there with Pat Monahan, lead singer of Train, who was currently in a sweet spot of having a lot of hits with Train, that somehow this could have been released as a single, or it could have been put out there a little bit more as a centerpiece of the album, and may have given audiences a chance on a wider level to give this album some gravitas and some love. So if you're trying to commercialise up and say, okay, well, how could we get more people sort of aware of this? Obviously, Brandon Flowers, at the time, Pat Monahan. Obviously, Rob Thomas did his thing, but I just sort of thought this one where, Pat was right in that sweet spot with Train, winning Grammys and getting hits. I just sort of thought this might have crossed over into the top 40 charts. Yeah. Anyway, on its own as merits and artistically speaking, it does deliver. Okay, song number 6, last song on the side 1 of our album B. Okay, we are going to go into New Sensation. Take it away.
This surprises me, but I really love it.
Yes.
It was so different to hear it sang in a country style. It's almost like a hymn. It's quite godly. Yep. You can imagine it being sung in a church. It's got such a lovely resonance with it. I just love it. And I think she's really gorgeous, the girl that sings it. And I don't think she plays the guitar part in the middle, which is a slide guitar. But hey, really, I think this is a bit of a standout because you're not expecting it.
Yeah, when I think back to listening to the albums, I always like sometimes when I do these deep dives just to go, what did I think at the time and what do I think now? Has anything changed? I actually liked it a bit better this time listening to it some 10 years later than I probably did in the early days. And you're right, it's got a bit of a gospel-y thing going on, hasn't it? I guess from the sort of the point of view of this particular sort of period, the song like New Sensation is such an upbeat, optimistic powerhouse anthem. It's brought down a notch in a tone. Again, if you're mixing something up, why copy the original to its DNA? Why not play around with it? And I think this lady here, Deborah D. Coral, her name is, she was an Argentinian singer. Again, must have come across maybe Chris Murphy's world music labels and things. I think that's how he met her and it suddenly became involved. But again, she gives a really sort of seductive R&B, gospel-y type sort of vocal and really sort of underplays the sort of the normal sort of sentiment of the song. I think this one's aged pretty well, B.
Yeah, I think so. If we can play a little bit more.
Yeah, okay, let's put a little sample extra in to tie things up on side 1. Before our pee break, B.
Oh, okay. You go first.
You're only human. What can you do?
B, well, we're back from our little break, okay? Thanks for a little interlude there. We are going on to side 2 now of Original Sin. And what a rip snorter barnstorming song to kick things off, pardon the pun, on side 2. We're going to get started here with Just Keep Walking. Play it away. Okay, well, Dan Sultan, B, he's the vocalist on this particular one. I thought it was great that the band picked something off their very first album, keeping a nice little blend across the album. We'll deep dive later as to the spread of tracks off albums in our sort of summary. Dan's an Indigenous Aussie singer, massive set of vocal chops, great soul R&B sort of singer. There are a lot of award sessions and things, TV shows in Australia where he came out and sung with the band. Looking sharp. Definitely a real rollicking version of this, B. I mean, the songs are rollick as it is, but they sort of really R&B it up in a modern sort of type sort of setting. Think of things like the Teskey Brothers, who are quite a well-known Australian act. It's got that real sort of soul vibes behind it. And I think Dan, in the version here, which is only 2 minutes 42, gets in, gets out, and leaves a nice sort of feeling after the whole thing. B, what's your take on it?
Well, Andrew Farris said, we'd almost given up with Just Keep Walking, tried many different approaches when we heard Dan and Dan's vocals, and it was like the sun had just entered the room. Truly outstanding performance. I loved watching it at the Arias.
Yeah.
And I swear I can see Rhett Hutchins dancing in the crowd there.
Okay.
I also just looked up, Dan. He's actually playing on November the 16th at the Small Fry Rock in Brisbane.
Yep.
And it's an 11 a.m. show, and it's a kids-friendly show. So
Fantastic.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Well, he's a guy who probably broke into the Australian charts and music scene a couple of years before. This probably helped him along a little bit. And then since then, he's had a very strong sort of Aussie career. But I got a feeling he was only in his mid-20s here. But, the vocals, he reminds me, maybe not sonically so much, but just the power. Do you remember the guy from The Commitments, Andrew Strong? Do you remember the movie The Commitments soundtrack?
Yeah.
And, he was like 16, 17 doing the Commitments album, and he had this just big, powerful set of lungs there. And I think Dan sort of reminds me a bit of him, not based on the same sound, but just that musical strength and set of pipes behind this particular track. And do yourself a favour, he's got some great albums out there that you could definitely enjoy also. I think for the band, what was great, if I take a slight detour, was that if I think back to some of the TV appearances here, they went out and played a few different tracks. I've mentioned Beautiful Girl before. They played this particular one. I think they did Don't Change, Kirk and Andrew on one or two shows. So it was great that they were playing a little bit of variety at some of these different events, not just pulling up the same track. So I think as an opener to side 2B, it definitely sort of wets the whistle for things to come.
Yes, definitely. And what's to come, Hayden?
All right. Well, song number 8, this one's over to you. We're going to go with Mystify by Lone, with guitar support here by John Mayer.
Song, and I'm sure you know that I love. I almost tear up every time I hear it. It's just so beautiful, so beautiful. Andrew says, I met Lone in Paris while recording Mystify and was fortunate to be present when she sung it. She was beautiful, and her performance just absolutely floored me. And I think that's what it is. It brings you to the floor. You just melt. She's so pretty as well. Beautiful.
Now, I'm going to be honest with our listeners. I had to Google Lone and just remind myself of who she was again and what she did. And because I remember the time she was quite young and she was, a French girl and things like that. And I think at the time recorded, she was only about 24. But she, going to Dr. Google here and just reminding myself of her career exploits. I mean, she was a bit of a prodigy there in France, and she, had gone on to do many songs and duets with many different people. She'd worked with Michael Gondry from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind on some of his soundtracks, even duetting, I think, with Lenny Kravitz a couple of years later. A great vocalist. I guess the hard part is sometimes I go to sort of sing Mystify, and she says Mystify.
It's cute. I know.
But it does sort of catch you out occasionally. Again, probably a good example here where the band are really sort of mixing it up, because Mystify is such a toe tapper.
Yeah.
And this one's really sort of slowed down on a tempo level.
Slowed, yeah.
The guitar, I love John Mayer at the end. And John's been an interesting guy in his career. He's gone a bit quiet the last few years, but between probably 2002 and about 2014, John Mayer was everywhere, multiple hits, albums, hits, chart hits and things, famous relationships, etc. there. Do you know one of his most famous quotes that he got into some trouble for, B? He was dating Jessica Simpson. When he was asked about her, he said, how would you describe her in an interview? And he come out with the doubled expression. He said, well, look, I think she's sexual napalm, which didn't go down too well. Napalm.
They break up just after that.
Not long after. Napalm was a solution used in the Vietnam War, but it wasn't a great choice of words. But look, John's always been well regarded as a guitar player, and I think particularly towards the end of this song, I think it's the longest track on the album. It goes at 5 minutes 49, but I think the guitar at the end does bring in a nice little counterbalance to the vocal and the tone. Again, listeners to be expecting a toe tapper and an all veils are misty and all that sort of stuff. It is a deconstruction times 4 on this one. So that was Mystify. All right, B, song number 9. We will go into an old classic fan, deep favourite, very unique sort of track in the band's arsenal. We will go with To Look At You.
What?
All right, B, well, it was great for them to pick a song that I know the band deeply love and a lot of the hardcore fans love as well. This was, I think, the third single off Shabu Shabar, an unlikely sort of more, I won't say deep cut because it was a single, but a more unique song that probably hasn't, I guess, a lot of set lists over the years. It was a song that was probably parked in the 80s and not played live much since. And Andrew solo co-write in the sense without Michael. But the vocals are by Cav Templey from
Eskimo Joe.
Yeah, from the Eskimo Joe from Perth as well, where INXS hailed from in their early days. Cav, I think, gives a really good urgent vocal on this. So being here in Australia, particularly the last 10, 15 years, Eskimo Joes probably were one of those biggest bands in Australia there for a period there. Songs like Black Fingernails, Red Wine, massive hits in this country. Cav also, along with Eskimo Joe, during the 2021 Grand Final, played at the Grand Final, and they went into a version of Kick that particular day, which was appropriate given it's a footy game. But what's your take on this one, B? Because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I thought it was really fresh. I really liked it. I liked the fact that he really made it his own. It was like a bigger sound, but quite electro still. It got that sort of 80s electro underground. You could almost imagine Gary Newman popping out somewhere with it.
Here in his car. Yeah.
Yeah. I really do like it. I can imagine it went off in the clubs. I can imagine those strobe lights going with this one. And Kirk, you can hear him in the background. It's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as a deeper cut from their arsenal, it's a really handy addition here. And I think it's adventurous in the sense that, I mean, again, they didn't put in Suicide Blonde or What You Need and these other sort of more famous songs. I think it was, again, an example of the band taking one of their own favourite songs they really loved. It was very new wave at the time and really sort of modernising it for a 2010 audience. And I think they succeed in that sort of endeavour. Eskimo Joe, one of those bands, I wish they did grow overseas, etc. there. For those who haven't heard their material, I'd like to sort of just throw a couple of songs at you that I would love you to go and check out. There's a song called Love List on their first album. It is one of the great ballads and slightly up-tempo sort of mood songs that is out there. There's a line there where it talks about alphabetical order, and I just think it's just one of the most special songs that you can hear. There's another great song around 2004 called From the Sea, and it's filmed in Fremantle, and the film clip's fantastic. It's got a whole bunch of synchronised swimmers. And it's a song called From the Sea, and it's just an absolute cracker anthem track. And I know, look, Eskimo Joe were quite influenced by INXS, you know, given sort of the pedigree. So it was nice for Cav to come in and do his vocals. There was rumours, particularly, I think in some interviews, if you do deep dives, where Chris Murphy had bailed up Cav at some concert series saying, okay, well, you're going to be the new singer of INXS, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how this is going to play out, and blah, blah, blah. And it was probably the height of his success with Eskimo Joe. And he said, well, Chris, I'm a little bit booked at the moment. There is some interesting anecdotes about that. But some of Eskimo Joe's songs had some INXS sort of type rhythms there that you could sort of see the pedigree. So a good addition be.
And Cav pops up on the album that The Room for Memories.
Yeah, absolutely. Great call. Yeah, he popped in and helped on The Room for the Memory sort of reboot last year, which was awesome. Yeah,
follow Cav. He's quite fun to watch actually on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah. All right, number 10, we're going to go with Kick. Let's take it away with Nick Acosta singing vocals, and we'll come back and hear from you.
Deep at the beginning, but it changes, and I've really come to like it, especially when she does the chorus, and it's delivered pretty slowly, and it's very poignant, and you listen to the lyrics more, whereas Kick, you know, it's like really in your face, isn't it, the original song, whereas this one's pulled back a little bit, and you really have to think what's she going to say next. It's got a lot of strengths and beauty, and I like the twinkly parts and, you know, make your peace, and it's grown on me.
All right. Well, this is one who's my stinker of the album, so there you go.
Right, yeah. Perhaps you need to listen to it more.
Oh, right. Well, I have listened a few times, and I still call it a stinker. But anyway, let me deep dive a bit. Nick Acosta, kudos to her. I think the vocal's fine. It's not really what she's doing with it. I just think that they missed an opportunity here. They had on the album, in terms of breaking it down, I think this was one of 4 songs. Let me have a double check here. 1, 2, 3, 5 songs. They had 5 songs from Kick on the album, on this album. I think they could have taken at least one of those off, be it Kick, and come up with something a little bit better for the album. To me, I mean, Kick's not one of my favourite songs off the album Kick anyway, so maybe that's probably half the battle. However, you know, it's just sort of meanders and it's just doesn't really do much for me. She's married to a guy called Justin Stanley, who is a very famed Australian producer. But his biggest fame here was being in the band Noiseworks with John Stevens. But Justin went overseas and built up a production career and worked with people like Arcade Fire and Silverchair and some of the very famous Eric Clapton. A lot of people overseas. So he's done very well for himself, and he married Nika. But yeah, I just think this one sort of suffers a little bit from just being a little bit mediocre. I don't think it sort of really adds much. And I would have thought, well, maybe they could have gone back and taken a track. Let's just use our thoughts here. I wouldn't say Elegantly Wasted. I think that's Michael's album, and they probably wanted to keep that for what it was. But maybe they could have gone back and, say, reworked something off the swing, say, taken something like Johnson's Aeroplane. It would have been interesting, and seeing how they could play with that, or, you know, taken maybe something like Dance with the Jetty, or maybe something a little bit different and playing around with it. Yeah, this one, I remember at the time, and even listening the last few days, was a bit of a skip. It didn't really do much for me.
Yeah. I get it, because it's one that's...
It also has 5 minutes to 10 seconds. I just think, again, it kept going. But, you know, I don't want to talk you down off the ledge, though, B. You know,
Oh, no, I've managed to get back up onto the,
okay.
ledge.
All right, she's back on the ledge. I've jumped off. I've just hurry-curried.
Come back, we've got 2 more songs.
All right, let's go into a pretty pivotal one here. We're going to go into song number 11, which is Don't Change.
Okay, well, it had to really be the last song, but it's not, is it? It's like a little encore coming up later.
Yeah.
It says, Andrew again, of all the songs in his project, it's probably the one that has changed and evolved the most. My brother John has done a great job steering it. So John was the one that orchestrated all of this. And it's the vocals are Andrew and Kirk. I would say I've heard them both sing this live together as well, and later on, only a few years ago, and their voices have matured even more, or they're even better now. I feel that it's okay. I don't actually really like it.
Well, look, I look at this particular song and go, look, Kirk is a great, I would say, backup vocalist per se, and he's got a pretty sort of solid voice. Andrew is a bit like, to me, a bit like Ben Harper. He's got a little more of a gravelly sort of voice. The range is probably not as high. Even more of a Lou Reedy type sort of voice is what Andrew's sort of got. What I like about this particular track, to me, is if you take an optimistic song like Don't Changes and look at the clip and the anthemicness and the band and they're being young, this is a band 35 years into their career. It's contemplative. They don't have Michael there. There's a resonance behind it. There's a melancholy behind it. Often a great pop song slowed down into a sort of slow groove can make a great ballad. I think a little bit of that Gary Jules song, which he covered the Tears for Fears and Donnie Darko, Mad World.
Yeah.
Remember something like Mad World, which was there? Yeah, I think a great song can be played slow or fast at different tempos. Yeah. I think the choir stuff in this was really quite
brilliant, that was nice.
In terms of the sort of that there. It's sort of, if we think back to their career, this is what the band probably opined, this is a studio release. This is one of the very last songs that they've ever recorded and released on an album, and it has a certain climactic feel to it. I don't know if they felt that at the time, but listening to this album the last few days again, this feels climatic in the sense that this is the end of their recording career. Like they didn't record anything on a studio album since after this. True. So it sort of fits in nicely as this sort of contemplative reworking version. So I love it.
Yeah, when you say it like that, I mean, it's an acoustic, no drums. When I've seen footage, John comes forward and he's doing one of the little shakers and just there with the guitars and singing. Yeah, it's angelic. Like the video is like young love on the beach and everything.
And I think you could put this, and this happened, I think, a little bit. You could put this footage over anything that has a sense of melancholy behind it, or in a movie soundtrack and a love scene with a couple breaking up, or some heartfelt sort of, world event. It really, strikes a chord with the tone that it's coming from.
But if I had to pick this or Mystify, I'd go Mystify. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I'd go this. So there you go. Tomato. All right. Tying things up on the major album release, we're going to go with the next one there, which we alluded to earlier in the show. We're going to go with The Stairs. And welcome back to the fold. JD Fortune singing on this one, B. We're going to maybe go into the last part of the song, maybe the last 30 seconds here, because this is where I think it starts to show JD at his best. Over to you, B.
The Stairs, an interesting ending. I know that it's a favourite with the community, so I can understand why they probably chose this. I like this intro a lot better, I must admit. A lot more powerful and shorter.
Straight to the point, huh?
And I must admit, I actually do prefer musically the whole of this song over the other one. He sounds a lot like Michael in this as well. I feel that JD does get INXS and he understands how to deliver their lyrics, and I think he does an absolutely cracking job. I think it's a great ending.
Okay. What's interesting about this, just breaking down, is the tempo of the song is slower in the, forget the intro part, but just in the sort of the body of the song outside that intro bit. But it does run at a slightly slower tempo. However, in the outro part at the end, where JD's singing almost like a quickened up rap lyric at the end of the songs, we share the same spaces, blah, blah, blah. It goes quicker. There's some interesting backup vocals here. I can hear a few little Elegantly Wasted album backup vocals where you can hear little sort of band members contributing to the echo vocals. JD will say one thing and then you hear share the same spaces, and it does some nice little production tricks like I've Elegantly Wasted there. JD, on this particular one, plus one of the extra tracks on the bonus album, was very proud of his vocal, and I think he should be, because I think he sort of nails it there. At the concert, I do remember seeing it live and being quite blown away by it as well. So again, we talked about The Stairs like last week, we won't go over it again, but a great example of picking a deep cut and reworking it and giving new audiences a chance to discover just a great song for them.
And I can see why it was probably the last one, because Andrew says, I love the way JD puts his vocal genius and passion into the new recording of The Stairs. Probably my favourite track on this project.
Yeah, excellent. Good praise. So that was sort of the major sort of 12 tracks there. As we said at the start, coming in at 49 minutes, 30 seconds, roughly four minutes plus a song. Some really sort of creative leanings and styles and instrumentation and production there. I do remember when this album came out, they were the 12 tracks. And I think part of our sort of journey of going down to the record store and the CD sort of buy it was just working on what they did choose to put on it. Like everything, there are little bonus editions to come out, and there were a few other sort of variations on this, and we'll talk a bit about that. In the Australian deluxe edition sort of bonus, they did put out bonus track that you only heard, I think, for the first time a bit earlier today, B, which was Devil Inside. It did have a Ben Harper and Nick Acosta version on the deluxe edition. Again, I'm sort of glad it didn't make it to the sort of the main album, because it would have given it 6 songs off kick. And again, for collectors or as a deluxe edition, as that 13th track, I think, hey, cool. But I'm glad it didn't appear on the 12. Let's just give our listeners a little sample of the Ben Harper and Nick Acosta.
Okay.
All right, now, but you got a little quote there from Andrew. Please share.
20-something years on, I find having other artists covering these standout INXS songs flattering and scary all at the same time. Either way, the songs have affected someone, somewhere, and a songwriter for all that I am grateful. Andrew Ferris.
Excellent. You've got a little deluxe edition sort of pack in your hands there, okay? Now, there is a couple of other little tracks on one of the sort of deluxe editions. Now, B, have you got a song 13 or 14 on that, or have you just got the 13 tracks there?
13.
Okay. So you're on that particular edition there, The Stairs comes out at 13, is that right?
Yes.
Right. And then you've got Devil Inside at 8.
Yes.
Okay. So there was another compilation of this particular editions there that did go out. Now, just a couple little things. For those enthusiasts out there, the album was reissued by Atco Records. Now, Atco, you may or may not remember, but that was the alternative sort of branch to their record company in the States back in the early 80s. And that's they used that for the US market again here. They had a version, as we said earlier, that just mixed up the Never Tear Us Apart version with Ben Harper and Marlene Farmer. There is another edition there with 14 sort of tracks on this particular album, deluxe version. It came in with song number 13, Love Is What I Say. And I know JD was a little bit frustrated. This didn't make it to the main album. And I think, going back to what I said earlier about Kick, I think I would have rather Love Is What I Say go onto the main album at, say, pick 10. JD's version on this particular one, B, have you heard this one before?
No.
You haven't?
No.
He really liked how it came out, and it ended up becoming a bonus track at song 13. We may be able to, through the powers of post-production, add that one in and give our listeners a little sample now. That was pretty cool, B, wasn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
I love how you find these things for me. It's like little Easter eggs.
Yes. So that particular track, was one that I had in one of the compilations. I think they had a couple of bonus track edition album come out, then a deluxe edition come out. There was, I guess, the standard album of the 12 tracks we've just reviewed. There was the iTunes and Australian deluxe edition pack that came out with 13, with The Devil Inside. But then there was this other sort of package that came out with Love Is What I Say, it's song 13. And then they had a Never Tear Us Apart orchestral version that I know John did with the London Symphonic Orchestra. And this was going to be the version of the album. But then when they got to, thinking about it, then they got, the French Connection in there and Ben Harper, they ended up mixing around. On one of these other bonus track album editions, you've got the Never Tear Us Apart orchestral instrumental. But the good thing about it is that, there are these little nuggets out there on some of the sort of the compilations that are surrounding the globe in people's collections and hiding out there in cyberspace. So I know I had all 3 of these editions. They're all filed away in my garage somewhere. You've got one of them handy with you, which is the 13 sort of tracks there. But overall, B, having listened to it again over the last few days and reacquainting yourself, what's your overarching thoughts on this?
I've always liked this album. Might be 1 or 2 that I might have to put, slide over. It's not a full-on, 10 out of 10. It's a good album. I like it for the car. It's a good driving album. I wouldn't put it as an INXS album as much, more like a speciality album.
Yeah. Well, when Mystify came out in 2019, there was sort of a soundtrack album for that coming out that Chris sort of cobbled together. I do remember when this came out earlier in 2010-11, I played it over a good 4 to 6 month period in my car, and I got good memories of playing, and I like just the fact that there was INXS staff that was still the band, but a play on sort of what they'd done. The guest vocalists and the variety is really, really impressive. Apparently there's, various other, as I said, guest additions, lots of material out there that John might have in his vault. We may have to twist John's arm to see if he can maybe release some of this stuff down the track through the band, because probably what this represented for the band, just tying up this sort of edition, was that it was sort of a new era for the band. The band were like, okay, well, we're not going to try and chart our way through the world trying to sort of reclaim glories of Kick. They were like, this is us. We love who we are, what we've done. Let's celebrate the best of ourselves. Let's do it with friends and family and guests around the world who like our material. Let's go back and deconstruct some things. Let's not chase a new lead singer per se. It seemed like a band quite artistically motivated, and I think that was the sentiment that Chris expressed. It's a pity it didn't find a bigger audience, but that was always hard at the time, where things were going. But to Chris's credit, we got 2 top 5 hits in the dance charts. It's a pity that they didn't get a couple of Grammy nominations in the dance charts with it. Sonics and the sounds, the productions, I said we'd love to get James Ash on to talk more about this. Kudos to him and credit to him, with John there in literally, disassembling, the hotel, INXS hotel and rebooting these 12 rooms, 13, 14 rooms, room by room into these new tracks, because that can't be easy. That's a task in itself. We'd like to think we'll have another episode on this album and break down the legacy, break down a little bit more, twos and fros, and be able to sort of tackle some more stuff within this. But I thought, B, at least we've got this part one out of the way this week. All right, B, we're going to go over a bit of a track today that was live at the ARIA Awards there with Dan Sultan singing Just Keep Walking, a rollicking version. We think our listeners who didn't see this at the time deserve to hear this particular one. Might want to go with Tricky next week because I was itching to share that one, but we can maybe do that next week. We'll go with Dan Sultan with Just Keep Walking. It's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from B. Goodbye, everybody.